Hello, and welcome to Compose Carolina, a virtual summer music series presented by the UNC Department of Music and Carolina Performing Arts. I am Alan Anderson. I am a professor, a composer by inclination, and head of the composition area in the UNC Department of Music. Composition plays an important, though often unrecognized, role in all musicians' lives. It is closely related to improvisation, or the art of speaking through one's medium, of creating and ordering utterance, not so much out of thin air, but from an alertness to the possibilities for notes and rhythms, instruments, performers, and circumstance. Composition implies decisions and determinations. It is one of many ways that musicians learn to hear themselves and to understand the shapes of their musical experience. At UNC, we offer a number of classes related to music composition. In addition to a course called simply Composition, which considers music in its notated and largely instrumental forms without particular regard for genre or style, and which aims to help the student realize his individual compositional tendencies, we also offer jazz composition and arranging, songcraft, beat making, courses in music technologies, and improvisation, both as a dedicated study and as a mode of practice within an instrumental studio. And I will add, composition plays a role in the study otherwise called music theory. While the number of students weaving a path through one or more of these classes is somewhat difficult to tally, students taking composition, often for multiple semesters, number between 8 and 12 at any one time. The 6 composers featured in the Compose Carolina series have all been a part of that class. Their musical inclinations run to chamber music, solo writing for their own instrument, music for jazz band, film music, and free improvisation, but I wouldn't want to categorize any one of them too narrowly. Others who have studied composition at UNC have gone on to write for musical theater, video games, ventured into computer music and sound design, write orchestral music, or music for bands. Over 6 weeks, Compose Carolina is featuring students and recent alumni who have written original works that vary in style and instrumentation, but are connected by the common theme, looking forward, interpreted however these musicians pleased. My composition colleagues Stephen Anderson, whose work spans concert and jazz music, and Lee Weissert, whose work is fundamentally informed by wide-ranging music technologies, will join me in introducing and interviewing the featured composers. We're very excited to share what they've created. It's time to hear some music. Let's meet this week's Carolina composer.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Eliana, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here with you. Before we begin, I just want to say a few things. First of all, thank you to Carolina Performing Arts for taking interest in our composition students. It was a nice surprise and a delight to learn of this opportunity to showcase some of our talented students. And Eliana, I want to tell you something off script here in front of our audience. There's something that music professors, and I suppose all professors do, that students may not be aware of, and that's we tend to brag about our students and we tend to claim them. So we'll say on annual reports, well, my student did this or accomplished this or that, and so there's a lot of us who are pleased to claim you. And I suppose institutions do that too. They like to know what their alumni are doing, and it's always great to see when they're out doing good things. So we're proud of you, and I'm honored to be here with you.
Steve, thank you so much for your kind words and for being here. And I'm really excited that you're the moderator for today's event. And also thank you to Carolina Performing Arts and the UNC Music Department for curating this event and inviting me to be here today.
Absolutely. Well, just to begin here, we were chatting the other day, so we've kind of talked about this, but I'd like our audience to know about this too. Formerly, my first awareness of your composition studies was when you studied with Alan Anderson. I thought it began there. But you were telling me the other day that it goes further back, and I wondered if you'd share with our audience a little bit about that. Tell us about your early compositional experiences, even performing experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So I relate a lot of that to my very first private teacher. I focused on classical piano performance. I studied with him from age 6 to 18. His name is John Ruggiero. And I really do hold a very special place in my heart for him. Very early on, he taught me the importance of studying something in depth, the hard work that diligence takes, and then also really urged and encouraged me to explore and be more creative. So very early on, he encouraged me to pursue some compositions. And of course, that starts out with writing little melodies. I remember a little moleskin notebook everyone has, and you write a little melody in there, play it at the piano. I wrote a little bit started using finale and things like that, but I would credit a lot of that to my early teacher, John Ruggiero, of how I started.
That's great. It's great to hear that piano teachers out there can also serve as mentors for composers. So that's really good. Well, now tell us about your time at North Carolina. How did that shape you as a composer? You know, you had a lot of different opportunities there. I know you played in charanga, played in jazz ensembles. Tell us a little bit about how UNC kind of shaped your compositional and musical background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied with Alan Anderson on the classical composition side of things all 4 years, and a little bit before that in high school. And that exposed me to composition being kind of a practice that you can work on every day rather than just a thing you do in spurts of inspiration. Then going into, I studied with Clara Yang initially my freshman year on classical piano. And my sophomore year, I attended a big band concert at UNC, and they played a few selections from the Count Basie Atomic album. And I remember going back and listening to it and thinking, wow, I haven't really heard anything like this before, and I really want to learn about it. And what I'm really grateful for from the UNC department, and specifically you, Steve, is just how open and encouraging you all were to taking me in, even though I was basically starting from square one. And Steve worked so patiently and diligently with me during my college years, as well as helped me well outside of that once I graduated. I would also add David Garcia's Charanga Carolina exposed me to musics I was unaware of. Also attending the Ernest Turner Trio jam session at the Shed every week helped shape my musicianship. And the students around the area telling me, you know, check out this record, check out this artist, go to this concert, go to this session. So I would say everything from UNC to the surrounding areas to the eager students helped shape what I know and who I am today.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And going back to my thought about, you know, people like to lay claim to good things, you know, talented students that go on and do good things. In truth, the concept of it takes a village is really true, you know, and you know, who's to say? I mean, even in our own right, I don't know that I could pinpoint any one thing that I would say this was my influence. You know, it's like a whole life experience of all
Absolutely.
the people you meet, and sometimes even someone telling you about a record they listen to, you know, and then you go check it out, and then that inspires you in ways that you may not even be cognizant of. So that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I got to ask you another question related to piano. And first of all, how long did you study with Clara Yang?
I definitely my whole first year at UNC.
Okay. She's a fantastic pianist and a good friend of mine. She's actually about to play a piece of mine that I'm excited about, and my colleagues also have written for her. One thing I really appreciated about teaching you was that you came in with a lot of piano chops. For those who don't know that word, piano technique, you know. And so a lot of the things that I struggle to teach other composers who don't have any piano technique was just, I didn't have to say anything to you. You know, so how did that relationship with your piano training affect your composition? In terms of, I know you talked about your teacher, but like, how did that facilitate your writing, your classical piano and your jazz writing?
That's a great question. And I would say that, you know, in the most simple answers, I do all of my composing at the piano. It's basically like slow improvising. almost any chart I write or any piece I write, I can fully play at the piano before even notating it. And this is really helpful. It can be dangerous, as you can just write piano music for an ensemble. So you break out of that kind of habit. And all the music I was exposed to through studying classical repertoire, jazz repertoire, that also directly influenced the composing. I will add, like, I really don't feel at home as a performer. I don't like playing in front of people. I often can't get out of my head, but I feel much more at home composing because I have all the time and space to get into flow, and then it feels like it's much bigger than yourself. And I'm a pretty introverted person, so I think I need that time and space to get there.
Yeah. Well, that brings up sort of my part B of that same question was, I remember at one point, you studied with me, I can't remember how long, as a piano student, jazz piano student, and you were at a time where you were out playing quite a bit and doing awesome. She's a great pianist, by the way, to our audience. And then you were saying you want to kind of just take more time to write. And I remember encouraging you, and then you felt like you wanted to just really focus on your composition studies. Where are you at today with that, now that you're up in New York and everything? How does that work? How's that relationship between the two, performing and composing?
Well, I do practice piano still because that's just such a big part of my life, and I constantly explore new classical repertoire, transcribe things, and still compose at the piano, and as well participated in some classes that involve some playing. But I still would say that if asked to perform, I would prefer to perform for my plants or my cat or something like that. But for composing, it's a much better place for my personality and my medium.
Well, your plants and cat are fortunate. So they get to hear you. Okay, well, let's go into, there's some other questions I'll ask after we listen to your piece, but let's go into your piece, Quiet Resistance. And if you could just tell us a little bit about the theme. We'll come back after we listen and delve into that further, but the process series theme is looking forward. How does your piece, Quiet Resistance, fit within that theme of looking forward, or does it?
I'll give a quick background to what the inspiration was and then relate that to looking forward. So it was inspired by a few events. One was reading my friend Tamara Fakouri's dissertation, which is entitled Quiet Resistance, the title that I stole. Then also my grandmother Sveta's death. And alongside a family death, you often think about that person's life, of course. And in particular, I was thinking about her marital life. So going back to Quiet Resistance is this, it's an intuitive, it's an unorganized act of rebellion by an individual who is oppressed or abused. And relating this to my grandmother's life, there's a specific action I think of that I really admire her for, which is, my family immigrated to America from Russia in 1991, 5 years before I was born. And my grandfather was inflexible, unwilling to learn English, didn't want to be part of American culture in any way, and wanted to go back to Russia and take with him his wife or his property. And I think my grandmother did something incredibly brave, which is she stood up and said, no, I'm not going. I'm going to learn English. I'm going to get a job. I will pursue a meaningful life through my daughters, my granddaughters, and grandson, and music, as she attended many concerts. And I find that to be an act of resistance because she was kind of pushing back towards very traditional senses of what a marriage is and what a role of a wife is. So relating that to looking forward, the point of the act of resistance are to reveal hypocrisies, to reveal absurdities or dark undersides of these long-standing traditional values, and think about what enforces them, question why we have them, and then the most important part, look forward to and think about how to change them for the better, to create a more compassionate, just, moral world.
That's profound. That's great. So I got to ask you, did your grandfather go back to Russia and your grandmother stay here?
Yes, that's exactly right. My grandfather did go back, but he would spend time in Russia and then come visit family in America. And that persisted for many years. And it was often like 3 months here and then the rest of the year in Russia.
Wow. That's very interesting. So that's with that profound backdrop, I think we should listen to the piece now.
Really quick.
Well, that was phenomenal. It's just so beautiful to see your growth and development. We were talking about that the other day when we were kind of preparing for this. And I've said this to you the other day, but I want to say it so our audience can hear that it's so wonderful as a teacher when you have a knowledge and vision of what's out there, what composers are doing these days, and you want your students to learn that. And with the undergraduate, often they get so far, and you grew, to a great extent during your undergraduate, but then just to see you go on to New York and to grow and all the things that I was hoping you would develop, you're already developing with just a year under your belt up there, which is wonderful. In particular, just the voicings for the large ensemble, this way, and getting the instruments in the right register. Another thing I really like about the piece is just the patience. And part of that patience is impaired by how we teach big band composing in a way, because historically the bassy band, things were laid out in 8-bar segments a lot of times, and that would change. They would vary that, but still everything was pretty evenly phrased. And I remember when I got lessons with Jim McNeely, who we'll talk about later, your teacher, and with Maria Schneider and other great writers, Bob Brookmeyer, I got a lesson with him. They were all trying to get me to stretch and to not have everything so evenly phrased. And that's what I'm hearing in your writing. You've got mixed meter. It's just really patient, and there's no sense of, oh, I got to quickly get this done. Anyway, I just want to congratulate you on that. Tell us a little bit about the ensemble in the video. Introduce us to the program there at Manhattan School of Music. What is the ensemble? How do the rehearsals work? How much time do you get with the ensemble? I assume this was a live concert. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Before I answer that, Steve, thank you for your kind words. And I will say that all of the growth, of course, involves a lot of going up there and failing. So there was a lot of that as well that you don't see. I would also just like to quickly acknowledge the soloists you saw featured today. So you saw Chris Palmer on bass, Cameron Alforky on trumpet, Greg DeAngelis on trombone, and Dor Haviv on alto. Steve, to go back to your question, yeah, so the big ensembles at MSM, there's about a concert every 2 weeks. And for the 2 weeks before the concert, you have rehearsal almost every day. So the people assigned to the composer's band, which this was, you have the rehearsals 2 weeks before, and each composer gets like a slot of time. I think we had about four 20-minute rehearsals or 30-minute rehearsals. And, the first time you go up there, you've been living with this piece in your head for so long, and you're bringing in to 17 individuals just notes on a page and some markings, expecting to hear this piece of music. So naturally, that's what the first rehearsal is like. Then I would record each rehearsal on a Zoom recorder and, spend a chunk of time listening to that and create my next rehearsal plan based on things I heard, with the goal in mind of bringing out nuances and bringing out some of the parts that bring the music to life, take it from that level of just reading the notes or just getting through the piece left to right. But yeah, every composer we had about 2 weeks to prepare for this concert, and the musicians really did an incredible job there.
I would say, yeah, they're terrific players. So 4 rehearsals, you said?
Yes, I did schedule like one outside of the school as a separate rehearsal, just because I thought it would benefit. So I would say in total 5.
Yeah, well, that's a challenging piece for them to put together with 4 rehearsals. That's great. Okay, well, let's talk about that. One of the things you mentioned was, first of all, we've talked about the theme of quiet resistance, and it's obviously something deeply personal to you. But in the end, whatever theme the composer has in mind eventually gets into putting dots on the page. And you're hoping that an audience will feel, well, to some degree, we hope that they'll feel a sense of what we felt and have in mind through these dots on the page. I told you this before, but when I was at North Texas, Maria Schneider was going to be an artist in town for a few days. And it just so happened that she was a guest when we had one of those Texas ice storms. People think Texas is hot all the time, and it is. But in the winter, sometimes it'll rain when it's warm, and then the temperature will just drop. And so we had one of these, ice storms where the whole town is just like an ice rink, and no one can go anywhere. That was fortuitous for those of us who were composers, because they put Maria Schneider up in like not a hotel, it was like an apartment. And they just said, since we couldn't do any events, they sent us over to hang out with her. And we must have had at least 3 hours there with her. And one of the things I remember that she said, and there was just 4 of us composers there with her. And one of the things she said was that she died when she heard her ensemble play the music for the first time. And you were mentioning, the first read through was just kind of getting all the syntax of the rhythms and so forth. But I was surprised to hear Maria Schneider say that with that world-class ensemble. Even those guys, there's a moment where it's just dots on a page. How did that evolve for you from that first experience? And do you feel that in the end you're able to translate the theme of quiet resistance to your audience?
I think that's a great question, and I agree with Maria that it is really frightening to not just bring in dots on a page, but to stand in front of 17 people and convey something that's very vulnerable to you. And the rehearsal process is a team process. It's not just me trying to say what quiet resistance is. I can say that, but what really brings it to life afterwards is when people bring their individual experiences of maybe how that relates to their life. And I was talking like backstage with Dor Haviv, the alto soloist, and he was talking about things going on in his life and how playing this solo tonight will be really cathartic for him in the theme of quiet resistance. So as soon as that kind of thing starts happening and more people start relating, I think the music finds a way to come to life in a lot of ways.
That's a great point. That's so true. Sometimes you have a chance to talk to the players. They might ask, what does this mean? What's the piece about? And then if they can get a sense of what it means to you, then it can really, bring the music through them to the audience. So I like that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your role as conductor. That's not something we've done a lot of here at UNC in terms of our jazz arranging, and it's given me ideas that that's something we should do more of, is let the students conduct. What was that like? Was that in a sense performing, right? Was that frightening? Was it helpful to be there on stage with them, to guide the music? Tell us about that.
I think that's a really interesting and important question, because a lot of the times you hear people say that a conductor is not needed in a jazz band setting. And I do agree with that in some sense. But what I found helpful was, music used to have 4 rehearsals. There are mixed meters. People need some signal of, oh, we're going out of this solo section to this next section. So it was kind of vital in that sense. Once you know the music so well, I don't think a conductor is necessarily needed. But in this case, it was. And actually, MSM offers jazz conducting classes. But that doesn't just span from big band, that goes to like more studio orchestra work. So it starts expanding into things that maybe a conductor is much more needed and useful in.
Yeah. Well, not to keep going back to Maria Schneider, but, what she talked about when she would sketch music, the way she would know if the music was right was by laying out a whole chunk of music and then dancing to it, and that's what she does on stage too. She's up there dancing, and just her movements draw you into what she's feeling with each section of the piece. At least that's what I found as a listener and a watcher. She was just here with Carolina Performing Arts last semester, mid-semester, I guess. So anyway, just an observation there. Yeah. Let's go back to the theme of the piece, Quiet Resistance. Now, you told us a little bit about that, and I don't want to pry too much, but is there more that you would like to share on the theme of Quiet Resistance, your friend's dissertation, Tamara, right, is what you said her name was?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share with us on that?
Yes. So Tamara Fakore graduated from the philosophy PhD program at UNC and now has a professorship at the University of Minnesota. I've been in contact with her the past couple of days because I was really hoping to share the dissertation with anybody watching who might be interested in reading it. But she's working on the final edit. It's going to be available in a couple weeks. And if anybody is on here and interested in reading it, I would be so happy to send it to you if you reach out to me. She explains so well what it is, gives historical context and examples, talks about why it's important. And I really encourage checking out her work.
Yeah, and I imagine that will be housed in UNC libraries at some point when it gets to that, as they do with most dissertations. So people could probably get on and search it there. So
I'll have to clarify, but yes, I'm sure that will be available.
All right, now let's get to something I'm very selfishly very interested in. Tell us about your teachers at MSU. I know you said you studied with Jim McNeely. Talk about your training there.
Yes. So for those of you who might not know, Jim McNeely is a pianist and a composer, a really big kind of father-head figure in the jazz composition world. Played with the Thad and Mel Lewis Orchestra, played in the Stan Getz Quartet, and with Phil Woods. For me, learning that I was going to take private lessons with him was so exciting. This is someone I admire, really look up to, and studying on a weekly basis privately has been incredible, and I feel growth from it. Part of what we do in lessons is, I'll bring in some of his music and I'll study it, figure out some questions, and we talk about his music, and I get to learn about his process, which is vital for a young composer, just to hear someone you look up to and hear about their process and how it relates to yours. Additionally, I bring in my own material, of course, and a few of the composers and I organized a reading session at Manhattan School of Music that's there to read new works by young composers and mostly sight read it so that we get to hear the feedback of our own pieces. And I started bringing that into my private lessons with Jim McNeely, and it opens up a whole new world. Otherwise, you just bring in MIDI files and it's kind of a dead end. But with reading sessions, a whole new world of concepts open up. You talk about what worked, what didn't. Did you achieve what you wanted with this section? What does this instrument combination or mute combination sound like? What does this voicing balance sound like? And you really go into much more detail and learn so much more through just having the access to a reading session. So I'm very, very grateful for my lessons with him. I would also add a couple of other really inspiring teachers have been composer Reiko Feuding and pianist Phil Markowitz. With Reiko Feuding, I took a class on Beethoven string quartets, and the whole time we just analyze and focus on Beethoven string quartets and analyze the sonata form, the orchestration, harmony, rhythm, see what boundaries he was pushing at his time. So a lot of these in-depth classes and the private lessons and reading sessions all contribute to just what type of concepts I'm learning at MSM.
So when you study a string quartet, and now here we're going off script here, but now you piqued my interest. Something I've always been fascinated by is how counterpoint in classical music can propel the motion. And the tradition in classical music was the less percussion, the better, and so to speak, because of the melodies themselves propel the motion. Now, how does that work in a jazz context? Have you tried to think about how counterpoint with instruments of pitch relate to a jazz situation where you have a motor, so to speak, with the bass and the drums? How do you pair what you're learning in classical music with what you're doing in jazz?
That's a great question. And it's, of course, difficult to pinpoint specific things as both classical and jazz and whatever other music all influence each other. But like you said, in the classical world, I remember studying vertical harmony, counterpoint, harmony and context a lot. And I think about that a lot when I'm writing in a big band medium setting. The inner voices of voicings, making sure there is some melody going on there. And with the bass, thinking of a counterpoint line in the bass coming in, but approaching it more like a melody that it could also be an octave higher, and it could really relate into the melody going on the upper side of things. So I love thinking about that kind of stuff, and just especially harmonizing a section once I have a lead line and thinking about inner voices and inner melodies.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to, you and I are going to get together next week, we were saying, and we'll have to talk more about that when we don't have a time limit. I do want to ask you another thing that we hadn't planned on, but since you raised it here today, I'm interested. You hear that Mahler had the orchestra at his disposal as a conductor, and that he could conduct his pieces and then make a lot of revisions after hearing them. That's quite a luxury that I think many composers would envy. Now, you talk about that with your lesson. It's also an enormous amount of work to create a piece, print the parts, tape the parts, pass them out to the ensemble, bring them back, and then have the integrity as a composer to make changes. A lot of people are like, I'm God, I'm a composer, nothing changes, it's perfect. But yet you're telling us that you go in the lesson, get feedback, and then change it. So is that how your process works? Do you print the parts, you extract, and then you tape them, give them to the ensemble? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of planning and emails, getting an ensemble together, last minute cancellations, printing parts. And yes, I will say I'm still now editing Quiet Resistance that you heard today. Really?
Really?
I find that there's always room for growth, and the point of the reading session is to hear the flaws, but I will also say you might also hear something that you thought would sound really bad and it ends up being really great, and you learn that way too in the future because you try things you wouldn't necessarily try, and then you just, with both of those aspects, you have a more open mind to both changing what you've already written, even if your heart is set on it, or trying things outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I got another couple questions here. I'm watching the time here. I think I could steal a minute here. Well, I have like 3 or 4 still I would love to ask you. We'll see how many we get through. So you grew up in Chapel Hill, right? Most of your life. And then you went to UNC. And now we lose a lot of students in the area who we know that come and do our programs or summer workshop or our jazz festival because they want to spread their wings. You know, when they're 18, they want to get out of the house and go somewhere else. And you chose to stay local, but now you're off in New York, spreading your wings. How has being in New York in general, you know, because you mentioned going out to hear Ernest Turner play at the Shed, and just getting out around here influenced you. What's that been like in New York?
It is a long question to answer, but I will focus on one perspective shift I noticed in myself. When I was in Chapel Hill, I often thought in a way that was thinking, you know, where do I belong in the music world? What do I have to say in this music world that's way over there in New York? And as I got to New York, I shifted that thought. And I think those are important questions to think about. But my thoughts shifted to, well, what does being part of this large music world, what values has that taught me about life? Why are those values important? How does that translate to more humankind, society? And it seems simple, but it's a really exciting shift because you realize it's not all about music. I watch a great film by a wonderful film director. I have a great conversation with a family member. I take a good walk. I feel similar feelings of inspiration and fulfillment as I do when I check out a great record, or I'm composing, or I'm at a wonderful concert. So you kind of zoom out, see, you know, it's everywhere. It's life. It's in whatever park someone tells you to check out. But it's hard to attribute that to whether I just grew older, or it's New York. But I think New York has that attitude to it. People are constantly like, go to this museum, check out this play, go to this little park. So it pushes you out of your boundaries and encourages that sort of thought.
That's great. Well, I would love to be selfish and ask 20 more questions, but I see that we have a couple questions from people in the audience. And so let me go ahead and read that from Escher. What is your favorite part of writing music, she asks.
I'm not sure. That's a hard question. I would say that once you get to a period of flow in composing, that's some of the most fulfilling, exciting parts of writing, because all of this, it's kind of like what I would describe an ego death, and you aren't thinking about really anything except your involvement of what you're doing at that moment. It's really difficult to get there, and it doesn't happen with every piece. It doesn't happen often, but those are some of the most exciting moments when you're right in that process.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Sometimes you get on another planet and then you forget what day it is, what time it is, and all that. Okay, here's another question. This is a question from Bella. It says, in your piece, which instrument represents babushka to you? Or is it more of a motive that feels like her?
So for those who don't know, although I'm sure plenty of people do, babushka is the Russian word for grandmother. And I would say that when I'm writing, I think this might come out in certain pieces, but I don't think, oh, this instrument represents this, or this motive represents this. It's much more that it was a meditation on all of these ideas, me just kind of thinking about what quiet resistance is and the stuff I mentioned about Babushka Sveta. And so it comes out that way naturally.
Good questions. Doesn't look like we have any more at the moment. Let me ask you a follow-up question on that. So our viewers would be surprised maybe to know that you speak amazingly fluent Russian. I had one experience where I heard you speak Russian. Someone came by my office and you were there. And somehow we found out this person speaks Russian, and then you two were just like going at it. And I've asked you this before, but if you could tell our audience, has your Russian heritage found its way into your music?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. I was brought up by music. From the music side, I was brought up by a Russian mother, a Russian grandmother, and a Russian aunt. So, you know, I grew, and that's just that side. You know, I also have Russian father side of the family. And I grew up on Glinka, Mussorgsky, Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich. So it's kind of in my nature and in my nurture. I have very vivid memories to Friday night family gatherings where we would, for Shabbat, we would be in the living room and sing Russian songs my grandparents grew up with. And again, attributing that to how I was brought up and in my nature, I think even if I can't pinpoint specific locations, it comes out through my voice.
Let me ask you another question. So going back to the theme of the piece, what do you, and not just this piece, but your music in general, what do you hope that listeners will take away when you have, you know, a theme like that that's quite personal to you? What do you hope that they'll go home thinking about or hearing in the piece?
Well, focusing on this piece in particular, it's an invitation for people to think about and to be exposed to what quiet resistance is. In particular, think about an individual or groups of people who live under oppressive conditions, and what kinds of actions can you take, thoughts can you have, and things can you do to challenge the things that enforce those conditions, and ultimately reevaluate yourself, your moral self, and push for changing those conditions for a better, more just world. So it's more this invitation, and I would say that expands to message in general I have, is to just be self-reflecting about your own life, other people's lives, and really fundamentally seeing the reality of other humans and what their lives are like, and things like that.
Yeah, music has a powerful way of, sometimes in conversation, it's hard to spark conversations about that, and people can sometimes be defensive, but if you create a piece of music and that has a theme behind it and share that, it can be a non-invasive way to get people to think about that. I like that. Okay, it looks like we have a couple more audience questions here. Let me see here. From Avery, what has been your favorite musical moments in the past year?
So I would say that a lot of them go to a certain private lesson I had or reading sessions, and all of the ones I think of in particular are when I would go up there and I learned that it doesn't have to be perfect. I do find I have perfectionist qualities, and it can make me go crazy. And in my lessons, I want to make sure I'm asking the right questions, or in the reading sessions that everything I bring in makes sense. And I just learned in all these moments that it's all a process, and it's okay to be vulnerable and not be perfect. And that was a big growth for me in that sense.
That's comforting to hear, coming from a New York perspective. You know, we always think of that as the big time, you know, and that even there you can allow yourself to make some mistakes. Okay, a question from Cree Schaefer, and I am watching the time here. Cree is a composer in our program. Do you know Cree?
I don't believe so.
Okay. She's doing great work. She's studied with me. She's been a singer in charanga también also. Mm-hmm. And she says, how do you balance your musical creative life with real life?
That's a great question. And I would say when anybody asks about balance, my answer is always, I don't. I have no idea how to balance things. But this perspective shift that I mentioned in New York is realizing it's So like your question saying it's either musical creative life and then real life, but realizing it's all kind of all in one helped a lot. So I always try to make time for reading and films and people, loved ones. And I have much work to do in terms of learning how to balance everything.
That's the ongoing question, how to balance things in life. I've been told we're getting the hook. We're being pulled off stage here. So I say that in jest. I thank our friends at Carolina Performing Arts for their kindness in showcasing our students. Eliana, as I said at the beginning, we're very proud of you. And I look forward to seeing what you do next. And we'll have to get together and visit more about Jim McNeely. I got other questions about that I'll ask you. And I got like 30 questions for you. So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone who took time out of their day to come today. And thank you again, CPA and UNC Music Department. And of course, to you, Steve. It was great to see you.
Thank you. You too.